The Valorian Interstellar Military Academy floated in geosynchronous orbit above Valor Prime, a monument to 6 centuries of collective military excellence and institutional self-congratulation. Its crystalline spires pierced the void like fingers pointing accusingly at any species that dared question its superiority. Within its hallowed halls, the galaxy's finest military minds gathered to learn the art of warfare, diplomacy, and, most importantly, how to feel smugly superior about their educational pedigree. The Academy accepted candidates from 247 species across the known galaxy, each one carefully vetted, tested, and processed through selection criteria so rigorous that simply surviving the application process warranted a medal in some systems. The acceptance rate hovered around 2%, and the graduation rate was even more depressing. This wasn't a school. This was a crucible designed by committee, refined by tradition, and administered by beings who genuinely believed suffering built character. They were probably right, but that didn't make them any less insufferable about it. Lecture Hall 7 occupied the Academy's western wing, a cavernous space designed to accommodate species ranging from the methane-breathing Zelthons to the silicon-based Kryn, who technically didn't breathe at all, but attended lectures anyway, out of what could only be described as academic spite. The hall's environmental controls worked overtime, creating microzones of atmosphere, temperature, and pressure that allowed everyone to slowly suffocate together in educational unity. Professor Thalen Vor stood at the lecture podium, his forearms gesturing dramatically as he reached the crescendo of his presentation. Vor was a Kellerian, a species known for their exceptional military strategy, 3 hearts, and an unshakable belief that being correct was the same as being helpful. His chitinous exterior gleamed under the hall's adaptive lighting, and his voice carried that particular resonance that all career academics develop. The sound of someone who's given the same lecture so many times they've started to believe their own simplifications. And thus, Vor declared, manipulating the holographic display with 2 hands while the other 2 emphasized his points. We arrive at the fundamental truth of military recruitment across the civilized galaxy. Species classification directly correlates with training viability. The display shifted, showing a 3-dimensional chart that probably meant something important to someone. Various planets rotated slowly, each tagged with environmental classifications that read like a disaster catalog. Class 1 worlds were pleasant garden spots where evolution had been suspiciously gentle. Class 10 worlds were where physics went to die screaming. Note the pattern, Vor continued, zooming in on the Death World category, a classification that made recruiters weep and insurance adjusters retire early. Beings from high gravity, high radiation, or otherwise lethally hostile worlds present unique challenges to military integration. Their biology, while fascinating from a xenological perspective, creates training complications that render traditional academy programs ineffective. A Thessian cadet in the 3rd row, all 7 feet of crystalline arrogance, raised a limb. Professor, are you suggesting Deathworlders cannot be trained? I'm not suggesting it, Cadet Jen, Vor replied with the patience of someone explaining orbital mechanics to a particularly dense moon. I'm stating it as documented fact. In the Academy's 612-year history, we have admitted 47 candidates from Class 8 or higher worlds. Of those 47, precisely 0 graduated. He let that sink in. The silence in the hall carried the weight of statistical inevitability. 0, Vor repeated, because apparently once wasn't devastating enough. The physiological adaptations required to survive on death worlds create insurmountable obstacles. They struggle with standard equipment, They cannot integrate with standard units. Their reflexes operate on different timescales. Their threat assessment is fundamentally incompatible with civilized military doctrine. He paused, building toward his rhetorical finish. Take Earth, for example. A Class 9 death world in the Sol system, recently contacted. Gravity 20% above galactic standard. Atmospheric oxygen concentration that would be considered industrial accelerant on most civilized worlds. Native predators that hunt in coordinated packs. Weather patterns that shift from calm to catastrophic with minimal warning. A moon large enough to create tidal forces that shaped their entire evolutionary path. The hologram shifted to display Earth in all its blue-green glory, rotating peacefully like it wasn't a certified hellscape. The dominant species, humans they call themselves, evolved as persistence hunters on open plains, developing endurance capabilities that border on the pathological. They can run for hours. Hours. Most species can sprint. Humans can simply continue. Their biology is a nightmare of redundant systems and overcomplicated chemistry. They heal from injuries that would permanently disable other species. They're pack-bonding omnivores with persistence instincts, which means they form emotional attachments to anything that holds still long enough and then refuse to give up on it. A ripple of uneasy chittering moved through the assembled cadets. Several species shifted in their seats, which was impressive considering some of them didn't have seats so much as gravitational anchor points. The Galactic Council's assessment was unambiguous. Vor continued, warming to his subject like a professor who'd finally found an example that wouldn't put everyone to sleep. Humans are scientifically fascinating, potentially useful for labor in extreme environments, but fundamentally unsuitable for military service. No human could survive our training program. The environmental requirements alone would be insurmountable. Their psychology is too alien, their physical capabilities too specialized, A hand went up in the back row. Not a limb, not a tentacle, not a crystalline appendage or a gravitational distortion indicating attention. A hand, 5 fingers, an opposable thumb. The kind of manipulator appendage that evolution designs when it wants something that can both climb trees and strangle threats with equal efficiency. Vor stopped mid-sentence, his prepared lecture derailing with an almost audible screech. He squinted at the back row, where approximately 230 cadets turned to look at the interruption. The human sat in a section that had been hurriedly retrofitted 6 months ago to accommodate Earth-standard atmosphere and gravity. She looked remarkably unremarkable. Bipedal, bilaterally symmetrical. Hair pulled back in what was probably a practical configuration, but looked vaguely threatening anyway. Her uniform fit, according to regulations, which several species had quietly noted, seemed wrong somehow. Humans weren't supposed to fit into things designed by committee. Yes? Vor said, his tone carrying the cautious confusion of a professor who suspects he's walked into a trap but can't see the mechanism yet. The human stood. Around her, cadets leaned away slightly, not from fear exactly, but from the instinctive unease that comes from proximity to something that evolved surrounded by things that considered it food. "Professor Vor," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite the atmospheric boundaries between them. "You just spent 45 minutes explaining why humans cannot possibly survive academy training." "Correct," Vor said slowly. "You cited statistical evidence spanning 6 centuries. Also correct. You specifically stated that no cadet from Earth could complete the program due to insurmountable physiological, psychological, and environmental incompatibilities. That is precisely what the data indicates. Yes." She smiled. It wasn't a friendly expression. Humans had far too many teeth for their smiles to be genuinely friendly, but it carried a certain devastating simplicity. "Then how?" she said with the casual precision of someone dropping a bomb from orbit. "Am I standing here?" The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the sound of 200 military minds simultaneously trying to reconcile categorical statements with contradictory evidence, currently wearing a regulation uniform, and looking mildly amused about the whole situation. Vor's mandibles clicked in a pattern that suggested his translation matrix was struggling with basic linguistic concepts like me and existing and oh no. "You," he started, then stopped. "That is, I'm Cadet Reeves," she continued helpfully, the way one might help someone who just walked face first into a bulkhead. "Enlisted 6 months ago. From Earth. Sol system. That Class 9 death world you just spent most of a lecture period explaining I couldn't possibly survive training on." She looked around the hall with the expression of someone enjoying herself far more than regulations technically permitted. "I'm currently ranked 17th in our class. I've completed all environmental adaptation courses. I hold certifications in zero-gravity combat, emergency atmospheric breach protocols, and xenobiology practical applications. Last month, I qualified expert with 4 different weapon systems designed for species with completely different manipulator configurations." Cadet Jen, the Thessian who'd asked the earlier question, made a sound like wind chimes falling downstairs. "That's impossible." "Yeah," Reeves agreed cheerfully. "That's what Professor Vor just spent 45 minutes explaining. Weird how I keep doing impossible things. Must be a Death Worlder trait." Vor had recovered enough of his composure to attempt damage control, which was admirable considering his entire lecture had just achieved sentience and murdered him. "Cadet Reeves, this is highly irregular. The data clearly indicates—" "That your data might be incomplete?" Reeves suggested. "Or maybe that Death Worlders don't fail training because they can't handle it. They fail because the Academy doesn't know how to handle them?" She said it lightly, almost casually, but the implication hit like a kinetic strike. "Are you suggesting," Vor said carefully, "that this Academy's training methodology is flawed?" "I'm suggesting that designing a program for species from nice, calm, civilized worlds and then acting surprised when Death Worlders struggle might be looking at the problem backward." The hall erupted in a chaos of overlapping translations. Cadets conferred in chattering, whistling, crackling dialogues. Someone's environmental control malfunctioned, briefly filling their section with what smelled like cinnamon and existential dread. Vor raised all 4 arms for silence. This will require investigation. Cadet Reeves, please remain after class." "Sure," Reeves said, sitting back down with the satisfied air of someone who just won an argument by virtue of existing aggressively in the direction of conventional wisdom. The lecture continued, but nobody was really listening anymore. They were all too busy trying not to stare at the human who just casually dismantled 6 centuries of military doctrine by showing up. 6 months earlier, Reeves's arrival at the Academy had created the kind of administrative pandemonium usually reserved for hostile invasions, or accidentally scheduling 2 different species' religious holidays in the same gymnasium. The Intake Processing Center had never encountered a human before. Why would they? Earth had only achieved faster-than-light capability 3 years ago, and the Galactic Council's official recommendation had been to observe from a distance and maybe check back in a century or 2 to see if they'd stopped trying to kill each other. Reeves had applied anyway, because apparently reading official recommendations was for people who accepted limitations as something other than suggestions. The medical scanner had examined her for approximately 45 seconds before emitting an alert tone that roughly translated to, "Absolutely not." There's a problem. The medical technician, a Palovian with 6 sensory stalks and deeply regretted life choices, had said, reviewing the scan results with increasing alarm. "Is there?" Reeves had asked from inside the scanner pod, which had definitely not been designed for human occupation, and kept trying to adjust her positioning in ways that suggested it thought she had 3 legs. "Your biology is... how are you alive?" The technician cycled through scan results, each one apparently more disturbing than the last. "Your muscular system operates under constant tension. Your cardiovascular system maintains pressure levels that should rupture your circulatory vessels. Your skeletal structure is experiencing gravitational stress that should be causing fractures. And your cellular chemistry..." The technician stopped, sensory stalks recoiling. "What is that?" "What's what?" "That. All of it. There are active chemical warfare agents in your bloodstream." "Oh," Reeves said. "You mean stomach acid? Or like adrenaline? You're going to need to be more specific." The technician made a sound like a tea kettle achieving consciousness and immediately regretting it. "Your digestive system contains chemical compounds concentrated enough to dissolve metal. You're carrying microbiological colonies that would trigger quarantine protocols on 17 different civilized worlds. Your immune system appears to be in a constant state of low-level warfare with everything, including yourself." "Yeah, that's pretty normal," Reeves agreed. "Is this going to take much longer? The gravity in here is weird." "The gravity is set to galactic standard." "Right. Weird." The medical processing had taken 6 hours and required 3 different department heads to sign off on the conclusion that yes, humans were technically alive by most definitions. And no, they probably wouldn't spontaneously explode under Academy conditions. Probably. The final report had included 14 pages of disclaimers and a strongly worded suggestion that someone informed the Council Earth's classification might need updating to Class 10. Quarters had been another adventure. The Academy's residential system auto-assigned cadets based on atmospheric and gravitational requirements, which worked brilliantly right up until it encountered someone who needed oxygen concentrations that most species considered a fire hazard. They'd eventually converted a storage section, installed atmosphere processors that handled Earth-standard conditions, and added gravity plating that the technicians had, calibrated while muttering about architectural masochism and voluntary planetary imprisonment. Reeves' first night, her neighbors, a group of Hessian cadets from a pleasant Class 3 world with reasonable gravity and sensible weather, had filed a noise complaint. Not because she was being loud, but because the sound of someone casually existing under those conditions was deeply unsettling. The constant hum of high-density atmosphere processors, the subtle structural stress of elevated gravity plating, the knowledge that just beyond that door was an environment that would kill them in approximately 40 seconds. Orientation week had been illuminating. The Academy's traditional welcome challenges, designed to humble new cadets and establish the difficulty curve, had produced unexpected results. The zero-gravity maneuvering course was supposed to be disorienting. Reeves had taken to it immediately, which made sense once someone remembered humans evolved getting thrown around by gravity variations courtesy of their oversized moon. Compared to ocean tides and atmospheric pressure changes, zero-G was just another Tuesday. The survival training simulation dumped cadets into a hostile environment designed to test their adaptability. Reeves had looked around the simulated wilderness, complete with dangerous fauna, uncertain shelter, and limited supplies, and commented that it seemed nice, peaceful even. Where were the weather systems, the venomous plants, the prey animals that had evolved active defenses. "This is a Class 6 hostile environment," the instructor had explained with strained patience. "Okay, but where's the hostility?" Reeves had asked, genuinely confused. She'd completed the survival course in record time, mostly because the dangerous fauna had taken one look at her and decided that picking fights with an apex predator from a death world was not in their best evolutionary interests. The combat training had been more complicated. Academy doctrine assumed certain baseline reaction speeds and threat responses calibrated for civilized species. Humans, having evolved surrounded by threats that considered them slow, crunchy, and delicious, operated on a different temporal framework. During her first sparring session, Reeves had moved with what she considered normal speed, which meant her opponent, a Calarian combat specialist, had spent most of the match trying to figure out where she'd gone. The exercise had ended when the instructor halted everything to recalibrate the safety systems, which had concluded that speeds like that had to be weapons malfunction. "How are you moving that fast?" her opponent had demanded. "I'm not moving fast," Reeves had replied, genuinely puzzled. "You're all just really slow." That had gone over about as well as expected. The dining facility had adapted after the incident with the spicy Kryn ceremonial dish that was supposed to be dangerously flavorful, and had left Reeves asking if they had any hot sauce. The kitchen had installed a separate food preparation area with warning labels in 17 languages, most of which translated to biohazard, death world nutritional requirements. But the real adjustment, the one that had taken weeks for the Academy staff to process, was that Reeves wasn't struggling. She wasn't barely surviving. She wasn't grimly enduring through sheer determination. She was thriving. Not because the training was easy, though some of it genuinely was easier for someone whose baseline normal included surviving conditions that made other species nostalgic for the safety of hard vacuum, but because she'd spent her entire life on a planet that treated every day like a qualification course for continued existence. Earth didn't care about your feelings. Earth didn't grade on a curve. Earth had weather that could kill you, animals that wanted to kill you, plants that might kill you, and microorganisms that were definitely trying to kill you. And if all else failed, Earth's own geological processes would take a shot at it. Growing up on Earth meant learning to adapt or learning to die. And humanity had chosen adaptation with the kind of spiteful persistence that evolution usually reserves for cockroaches and tardigrades. So when the Academy threw challenges at Reeves, her response wasn't, "How will I survive this?" It was, "Is this it?" Professor Vor's office occupied a corner of the Academy's administrative wing, with viewports offering a commanding view of Valor Prime below. It was the kind of office that communicated importance through strategic furniture placement and carefully displayed credentials. Vor had arranged it to project authority, wisdom, and the kind of academic gravitas that suggested he'd rather be right than happy. Right now, he was neither. Reeves sat in a chair that had been hastily reconfigured to accommodate human proportions, while Vor paced behind his desk with the restless energy of someone whose worldview was experiencing catastrophic structural failure. "This is highly irregular," he said for approximately the 7th time. "You mentioned that," Reeves replied. "The data clearly indicates that humans cannot successfully integrate into Academy training protocols. And yet, Vor agreed reluctantly, stopping his pacing to fix her with a look that probably intimidated most cadets. Reeves looked back with the mild interest of someone watching weather patterns. Noteworthy, but not particularly concerning. "Cadet Reeves, I need you to understand something. The Academy's training methodology has been refined over 6 centuries. It incorporates the collective military wisdom of 247 species. We have produced some of the finest military minds in the galaxy. Okay. We don't simply accidentally overlook entire categories of recruits. Don't you, though? Vor's mandibles clicked irritably. Explain. Reeves leaned forward slightly. Professor, how many humans has the Academy actually trained? The records indicate 47 Death World candidates across all classifications, none of whom... How many humans specifically? Vor pulled up his datapad, scrolling through records. His clicking slowed, then stopped. 1, he said quietly. Me. Yes. So, when you say humans can't survive Academy training, what you actually mean is that before me, no human had ever tried, and you assumed we'd follow the same pattern as other Deathworlders. The physiological parallels suggested that we'd be similar to other species from hostile environments. Except we're not. We didn't evolve on a high-gravity world. We evolved on a world with complicated gravity because of our moon. We didn't evolve in high radiation. We evolved with an atmospheric composition that's actively combustible and weather patterns that require constant adaptation. We're not specialized for one extreme environment. We're generalists from a planet that has all the extreme environments. Vor sat down slowly, processing this. You're saying human adaptability is itself an adaptation. Everything on Earth is trying to kill everything else on Earth, and the planet itself is trying to kill all of it simultaneously. You don't survive that by being really good at one thing. You survive it by being decent at everything and refusing to quit. Persistence hunting, Vor said, remembering his own lecture. Not just for prey, for everything. We're persistent survivors. We're persistence learners. We're persistence adapters. You throw something at us, we might not handle it well the first time, but we'll keep trying until we figure it out or die. And we're really reluctant to die. Vor was quiet for a long moment. This has, implications. Yeah. The Council classified your species as unsuitable for military integration. The Council classified us before anyone actually tried integrating us. The training protocols would need significant revision to accommodate... Would they? Reeves interrupted. Professor, I'm not asking for special accommodation. Your training is designed for species from civilized worlds. I'm from a death world. Your hard is my normal. I don't need the program to change. I just need you to stop assuming I'll fail because someone else once did. Vor studied her for a long moment. You're ranked 17th in your class. Could be better, Reeves admitted. I keep losing points on the cultural sensitivity modules because apparently my survival instincts read as aggression to species that didn't evolve with predators. And if I were to, hypothetically, recommend your continued enrollment? Then I'd keep doing what I'm doing. Training, learning, trying not to accidentally terrify my classmates by existing too loudly. This will require a formal review, I figured. The Council will want documentation, evidence, probably several committees worth of analysis. Bureaucracy, my favorite. The sarcasm was gentle but unmistakable. Vor's mandibles arranged themselves into what might have been amusement. You really are from a death world. Only someone raised in constant survival pressure would face institutional review with sarcasm. It's either that or panic, and panic seems inefficient. Very well, Cadet Reeves. I'll recommend your case for formal review. Expect the process to be extensive. Looking forward to it, sir. She stood, saluted with a precision that suggested she'd practiced until muscle memory overrode any lingering instinct to flee from authority figures, and turned to leave. Cadet, Vor called after her. She paused at the door. For what it's worth, well done. Reeves smiled. Still too many teeth, still vaguely unsettling, and left. Vor sat alone in his office, looking at the datapad displaying 6 centuries of training data. 6 centuries of categorical certainty. 6 centuries of knowing exactly what worked and what didn't. All of it potentially wrong because they'd never considered that death worlds might produce death worlders who were less unsuitable for service and more accidentally overqualified. He began composing his report to the Academy Board, already dreading the response. The formal review happened 3 weeks later in Grand Conference Hall 1, which was less a conference room and more a deliberate exercise in architectural intimidation. The ceiling soared overhead like the dome of a cathedral dedicated to bureaucratic process. Seating surrounded a central presentation area in concentric circles. The better to make whoever stood in the middle feel small, observed, and acutely aware of their own mortality. Reeves stood in that center, under lights configured to accommodate 24 different species' visual spectrums, which meant the overall effect was less illuminating and more interrogation by rainbow. The review board consisted of 12 senior staff members representing the Academy's various departments. Vor sat among them, looking like someone who'd started an avalanche by kicking a pebble and was now watching it gain momentum with mixed feelings. Admiral Kess, a Valorian with more ceremonial medals than seemed structurally sound, chaired the proceedings. Her translation matrix rendered her voice with the crisp authority of someone who'd commanded fleets and suffered precisely 0 fools in the process. Cadet Reeves, Kess began. This review has been convened to assess the unprecedented situation of your enrollment and continued presence at this academy. You are, as I understand it, the first human to attempt our training program. Yes, Admiral. And you were admitted despite Galactic Council recommendations that your species lacks suitability for military integration. Those recommendations were made before anyone actually tested the assumption, Admiral. A ripple of clicking, humming, and whistling moved through the board. Kess's facial plates shifted into an expression that might have been approval or indigestion. Valorian emotions were hard to read. Bold statement, Kess observed. Factual statement, Reeves corrected gently. The Council based their assessment on Earth's environmental classification and extrapolation from other Death World species. Nobody actually tried training a human to see if the extrapolation held. Your performance records are unusual. Another board member, a Thessian whose crystalline structure caught the light in distracting ways, interjected. You excel in areas where Death Worlders typically struggle. Environmental adaptation, combat response time, stress resilience. Yes, sir. Explain. Reeves took a breath, gathering her thoughts. Death worlds are classified as such because they're hostile to life, as the galaxy generally defines it. But they're not universally hostile in the same ways. A high-gravity world creates specific adaptations. A high-radiation world creates different specific adaptations. Earth created generalist adaptations because Earth is hostile in basically every possible way, simultaneously. She gestured, and the holographic display activated, showing Earth rotating peacefully. Gravity 20% above galactic standard, but not consistent because tidal forces from our moon create constant variation. We didn't evolve in one gravity. We evolved in many gravities that change based on where you're standing and what the moon's doing. The display zoomed in, showing weather patterns swirling across the planet's surface. Atmospheric composition that's chemically active enough to rust metal and support combustion. Weather systems that shift from calm to lethal with minimal warning. Temperature ranges that swing wildly between freezing and heat levels that denature proteins. and all of this happening simultaneously in different parts of the planet, which forced human ancestors to migrate constantly, adapting to new conditions repeatedly. She pulled up biological data, carefully sanitized to avoid triggering anyone's quarantine reflexes. Our biology reflects this. We're not specialized for one threat. We're built to handle many threats, inefficiently but adequately. We heal quickly because injuries are common. We have redundant systems because single points of failure are fatal. Our threat response is hair trigger because hesitation gets you killed. And we have persistence capabilities that border on pathological because knowing when to quit is how you die on a death world that doesn't care about your feelings. Admiral Kess leaned forward. You're suggesting humans are uniquely suited for military training, not despite being from a death world, but because of it. I'm suggesting humans are uniquely suited for any training that requires adaptability under pressure, Admiral, which, from what I understand, is the entire point of this academy. Another board member spoke up. Professor Dren, a methane breather whose voice came through translation as a gravelly whisper. Your combat performance has raised concerns. You move at speeds that seem impossible for your mass and structure. Compared to species from civilized worlds, yes, sir, Reeves agreed. But humans evolved with predators that were bigger, stronger, and often faster than us. We survived through endurance and reaction time. What seems fast to species that evolved without constant predation is normal for someone whose ancestors spent 1,000,000 years being hunted. And you don't find academy training difficult? This from a Palovian board member whose sensory stalks were extended in obvious curiosity. Reeves considered her answer carefully. Some of it's difficult, yes. The cultural sensitivity training is hard because my instincts read situations differently than species from peaceful worlds. The diplomatic protocols are challenging because human communication includes a lot of contextual aggression that apparently terrifies people. The technical systems require study because I didn't grow up with this technology. She paused. But the physical training, the survival scenarios, the stress conditioning, those aren't hard. Those are just life. On Earth, that's called Tuesday. The board members exchanged looks, which was impressive considering several of them didn't have anything resembling faces. There is also, Admiral Kess said slowly, the matter of your effect on other cadets. Reports indicate your presence causes unease. Because I'm from a death world, Admiral. Because I carry microbes that would trigger quarantine protocols on their home planets. Because I exist comfortably in conditions that would kill them quickly. Because when they look at me, they're reminded that the universe contains things much more dangerous than academy training. And you don't see this as problematic? I see it as educational, Admiral. These cadets will eventually serve in mixed units across the galaxy. They'll encounter species and conditions that challenge their assumptions. Better they learn to work with death-worlders here in controlled conditions than discover in the field that their training didn't prepare them for how diverse the galaxy actually is. Four spoke up for the first time. Cadet Reeves raises a valid point. Our training protocols have been developed primarily around species from Class 1 through 5 worlds. We've created an excellent program for preparing civilized species to work together. But we've potentially overlooked the value of including perspectives from less civilized environments. Are you suggesting we actively recruit from death worlds? Dren asked, sounding horrified. I'm suggesting, Vor replied carefully, that we've built a training program optimized for one segment of galactic species and assumed it represents all viable military candidates. Cadet Reeves's success suggests our assumptions may have been premature. Admiral Kess studied Reeves with an expression that suggested she was recalculating several decades worth of military doctrine in real time. Cadet, if we were to continue your enrollment, and I emphasize if, what assurances can you provide that your presence won't pose a security risk or training disruption? The same assurances any cadet provides, Admiral. I'll follow regulations, complete my training, and try not to accidentally traumatize my classmates any more than necessary. That's not particularly reassuring. With respect, Admiral, I'm not trying to be reassuring. I'm trying to be honest. Humans are new to galactic society. We're going to be disruptive simply by existing. The question isn't whether I'll cause disruption. It's whether that disruption is the kind that breaks things or the kind that forces things to improve. The silence that followed felt weighty enough to affect local gravity. Finally, Admiral Kess spoke. This board will adjourn to deliberate. Cadet Reeves, you're dismissed. We'll inform you of our decision within 48 hours. Reeves saluted and left, walking through the massive doors with the steady gait of someone who just argued with institutional precedent and wasn't entirely sure they'd won. The board's deliberation took 37 hours, which was apparently quick by institutional review standards, but felt eternal by every other metric. When Reeves received the summons back to Grand Conference Hall 1, she went with the calm acceptance of someone who'd survived worse things than administrative decisions. If they kicked her out, she'd figure something else out. If they didn't, well, she'd figure that out too. Admiral Kess waited in the conference hall with a datapad and an expression that could have meant anything. Cadet Reeves, she began without preamble. This board has completed its review of your enrollment status. Yes, Admiral. We have determined that your continued presence at this academy is acceptable. Reeves felt something unclench in her chest that she hadn't realized was tight. However, Kess continued, because there was always a however. This decision comes with conditions. First, your performance will be monitored more closely than standard cadets. Second, you will be assigned a cultural liaison to help navigate the social complications your presence creates. Third, you will participate in a study examining the viability of training candidates from high-classification death worlds. Understood, Admiral. And fourth, this is non-negotiable. You will prepare a presentation for the Academy's incoming class next term explaining human capabilities and limitations. Other species need to understand what they're working with. I can do that, Admiral. Kess set down the datapad. Off the record, Cadet? Yes, Admiral. You terrify approximately 60% of this Academy's staff and 80% of your fellow cadets. You exist comfortably in conditions that would kill most of the galaxy's population. Your mere presence has forced us to reconsider 6 centuries of training doctrine. Kess paused. Don't let it go to your head. No, Admiral. But also, well done. Dismissed. Reeves saluted and turned to leave, allowing herself the smallest smile once her back was to the Admiral. Behind her, Kess watched her go and wondered what she'd just unleashed on an unsuspecting galaxy. News of the board's decision spread through the Academy with the speed of scandal and the staying power of legend. Within a day, everyone knew that the human had been formally approved to continue training. Within a week, the implications started sinking in. If one human could succeed, maybe others could too. If humans could succeed, what about other Deathworlders who'd been dismissed without trial? If the training protocols needed revision to accommodate humans, what else needed revision? The Academy's administration was discovering that institutional change was rather like pushing a boulder down a hill. Easy to start, impossible to stop, and likely to cause damage to whatever was in the way. Reeves, for her part, continued her training with the same steady persistence that had gotten her this far. She attended classes, completed assignments, and tried to minimize the number of times per week she accidentally reminded everyone that she was a barely civilized predator from a planetary hellscape. She succeeded approximately 40% of the time, which was honestly better than expected. Her presentation to incoming cadets was scheduled for the start of next term, and she was already dreading it. How exactly did you explain Earth to species that considered rain a weather emergency? How did you describe persistence hunting to beings that thought marathon running was a theoretical concept rather than something humans did recreationally? But she'd figure it out. She always did. Because that was the thing about humans, really. The thing the Galactic Council had missed. The thing the Academy's data hadn't predicted. Humans were very, very good at adapting to situations that should be impossible. And when impossible situations became normal, humans just shrugged and kept going. It was, after all, what they'd been doing for millions of years. Why stop now? 6 months later, Professor Vore delivered his lecture on Death World recruitment to a new class of cadets. He reached the same point in his presentation, the part about Earth, about humans, about the impossibility of training Death Worlders. He paused, looking out at the assembled cadets. And then, he said, one of them raised her hand. In the back row, Cadet Reeves sat quietly, working on an assignment and trying not to be too distracting. 3 seats away, another human cadet, one of 5 who'd been admitted this term, listened intently. The galaxy was changing. Slowly, reluctantly, but definitely. And somewhere on Earth, more humans were probably filling out Academy applications because apparently being told something was impossible had never stopped humanity before.